There's a particular kind of loneliness that only mothers know. It's not the loneliness of an empty house. An empty house you can fill. You can turn on the television, call a friend, bake something just to have the oven warm. That kind of loneliness has a cure. No, the loneliness I'm talking about is different. It's the loneliness of being in a room full of your own family and realizing you've become the help. It's when your son walks past you in his own kitchen and doesn't ask how your flight was. It's when your daughter-in-law asks if you could just watch the baby for a second while she takes a call and then comes back 2 hours later without a thank you, because in her mind that's what you're for. It's when you realize that somewhere along the way, you stopped being a person in this family and became a function, a service, a resource they used when convenient and avoided when it wasn't. My name is Claudia Hayes. I'm 62 years old. I live in a row house on Mondawmin Avenue in Baltimore, Maryland, in the same house my husband Robert and I bought in 1989 when the neighborhood was still what people called rough, but what we called home. I raised my only son in this house. I buried my husband from this house. I've watered the same fig tree in the backyard for 27 years. And last Tuesday morning, I sat at my kitchen table and realized I had become a stranger in my own life. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. I hadn't taken a sip. I was looking at a photograph stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a crab, a souvenir from when Robert and I took Andre to Ocean City the summer he turned 10. The photograph was from Andre's graduation at MIT in 2014. He's in his cap and gown, and I'm standing beside him, and he has his arm around my shoulders, and he's holding me so tight you can see my dress wrinkle under his hand. I rode a Greyhound bus for 8 hours to get to that graduation. I couldn't afford to fly. I had saved for 2 years for that ticket and a hotel room 3 miles from the campus. And when Andre saw me in the crowd, he ran to me. He actually ran. He picked me up off the ground and spun me around and said, "Mom, we did it. We did it." We. He always said we. That was 11 years ago. Yesterday I called him. I called him because I had a dream about Robert the night before, a dream where Robert was young again and laughing, and I woke up wanting to hear my son's voice. The call lasted 43 seconds. I counted afterward. Andre said, "Mom, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back?" I said, "Yes, baby, of course, whenever you can." He did not call back. And I'm not telling you this because I'm angry. I want you to understand that. I'm not angry. I'm tired. I'm tired in a way that only women who have spent 40 years putting themselves second can understand. I'm tired in a way that sits in your bones and whispers, "This is all you get now. This is the portion. Learn to live on it." But I'm not going to live on it anymore. Let me tell you how it started. Not the ending, the beginning. Because the beginning is where I lost myself, and I didn't even know it. The year was 1982. I was 19 years old, a scholarship student at Coppin State College, and I was in love with a fireman named Robert Hayes. Robert was 6 years older than me. He had a gap between his front teeth and laughed like he meant it, the kind of laugh that made old women in the grocery store turn around and smile. He worked the engine company out of Station 14 on Pennsylvania Avenue, and on his days off he would pick me up from class in a yellow Buick Regal that he was more proud of than he had any right to be. His mother, Miss Ethel, loved me on sight. She said I had steady eyes. I didn't know what that meant then. I know now. She meant that I looked at people like I was really seeing them, and that's the kind of woman a good man marries. Robert proposed in March of 1984 on the steps of the Enoch Pratt Library downtown with a ring that cost him 3 months of overtime. I said yes before he finished the question. We married in June at Bethel AME, and my mother cried the whole ceremony because she said I looked too much like her own mama to bear it. We moved into a rental on Longwood Street. I finished my nursing degree. Robert worked doubles and triples and came home smelling like smoke and coffee. We tried for a baby for 4 years and lost 2 before we held one. Andre came into this world on October 19th, 1991, at 4 in the morning, screaming like he had things to say and needed us all to listen. The nurse handed him to me, and I looked into his face, and I understood for the first time what my own mother had meant when she told me, years earlier, "Claudia, you don't know what love is yet. You think you do. You don't." She was right. I loved Robert with my whole heart. But Andre was the first person I ever loved with my whole body. Every cell of me reorganized itself around him in the moment I first held him. I was no longer Claudia the woman. I was Claudia the mother. And that shift, that quiet tectonic shift inside me, is something I don't think I ever fully came back from. We bought the house on Mondawmin in 1989, 2 years before Andre was born. We were young and broke and proud. Robert planted a fig tree in the backyard the summer Andre turned 7. He said, "Baby, this tree is going to outlive all of us. Your great-grandbabies are going to eat figs from this tree." That tree is still there. It's bigger than the fence now. It drops fruit every August, and the squirrels get most of it, and I still make fig preserves every year in mason jars with handwritten labels. I used to send those preserves to Andre at MIT, a dozen jars every fall, wrapped in bubble wrap and shipped priority mail. He would call me the day they arrived and tell me his dorm smelled like home. His roommate from Ghana, a boy named Kwame, once called me directly just to thank me. He said, "Mrs. Hayes, I have never tasted anything like this in my life." I used to live for those phone calls. Robert got sick in the fall of 2008. He'd been coughing for months, and I'd been on him about it the way wives are on their husbands. But he was a fireman, and firemen cough. It's what they do. He finally went to the VA clinic when he couldn't climb the steps of Station 14 without stopping. Stage 4, adenocarcinoma of the lung. They gave him 8 months. He lived 10. He died on a Saturday morning in August of 2009. The hospice nurse had stepped out. It was just me and him in the bedroom upstairs, the one with the window that looks out over the fig tree. He hadn't spoken in 2 days, but that morning, just before the sun came up, he opened his eyes and looked at me and said, "Claudia, take care of our boy." I said I would. He closed his eyes, and then he was gone. Andre was 18 years old. He was supposed to leave for MIT in 3 weeks. He came into the bedroom after I called him, and he sat on the edge of the bed and held his father's hand, and he didn't cry. He just sat there for 2 hours, and then he stood up and said, "Mom, I'm not going to MIT. I'm going to stay here with you." I took his face in my hands, my son's face that I had kissed 1,000 times, and I said to him the hardest thing I have ever said in my life. "Andre Malcolm Hayes, if you do not get on that plane in 3 weeks, you will break your father's heart and mine both. You are going to MIT. You are going to finish, and you are going to come home to your mama a man. Do you hear me?" He went, and I sat in this house alone for the first time in 25 years. I worked night shifts at Johns Hopkins, sometimes 3 in a row. I ate dinner standing up at the kitchen counter. I slept on Robert's side of the bed because I couldn't stand to look at the empty place. But I kept that boy in school. I worked overtime every holiday. I never missed a tuition payment. And when Andre graduated from MIT in 2014, summa cum laude in electrical engineering, he walked across that stage and pointed at me in the crowd, and I felt Robert standing next to me so strong I almost turned to look. Andre moved to Boston after graduation, got a job at a tech company making more money in his first year than I made in 5. He was good to me then. He called every Sunday at 7 p.m. He flew me up for Thanksgiving. He came home for Christmas. He bought me a new washing machine the first year, a new refrigerator the second year, and in the 3rd year, he took me on a cruise to the Bahamas with him, just the 2 of us. And we danced at the captain's dinner, and I wore a blue dress that Robert would have loved. That was 2017. Then he met Brittany. I want to be careful here. I don't want to tell you this story wrong. I don't want to make Brittany the villain, because she isn't one. Not really. She is a product of her upbringing, just like I am a product of mine, and blaming her for who she was taught to be would be the lazy way out of a much harder truth. Brittany Whitfield was 29 years old when she met my son at a rooftop bar in the Seaport in Boston. She was a junior associate at a corporate law firm. She had gone to Dartmouth and then to Columbia Law. Her mother, Eleanor Whitfield, owned an art gallery in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her father, Preston, was something important at a hedge fund that I never fully understood. Brittany was beautiful. I won't pretend she wasn't. Tall, fair-skinned, the kind of woman who looked like she'd never had a bad hair day in her life. When Andre brought her to Baltimore to meet me in the summer of 2018, she walked through my front door, and I watched her eyes do a slow sweep of my living room. The family photographs on the wall, the doilies on the armrests that had been my mother's, the collection of porcelain angels on the mantel that Robert had bought me one at a time over the years. I watched her eyes take it all in, and I watched her smile. It was a kind smile, a polite smile, a smile that a woman gives when she is being a good sport about something she finds slightly embarrassing, I knew in that moment who she thought I was. But Andre looked at her like she hung the moon. And I had promised Robert I would take care of our boy, so I hugged her. I made her my grandmother's oxtails. I showed her Andre's baby pictures and laughed when she said he'd been such an adorable little thing. I played my part. She married my son on June 8, 2019, at her parents' summer house on Nantucket. The wedding cost $300,000. I know because I heard Eleanor Whitfield mention it to someone at the rehearsal dinner, the way some women mention what they paid for things when they want you to know you could never. I sold my mother's gold bracelet to buy a coach ticket to Boston and the ferry to Nantucket. I didn't tell Andre. He would have paid for it. He would have insisted. But I couldn't let my boy pay for me to come to his own wedding. I had my pride. I wore a navy dress from Nordstrom Rack that I had tailored at a shop on North Avenue. I sat in the front row. I watched my only child marry a woman I didn't trust, and I smiled the whole time, because that's what mothers do. We smile through the things we cannot stop. At the reception, Eleanor Whitfield sat next to me for exactly 4 minutes and asked me 3 questions. What do you do for work? Oh, a nurse, how wonderful. And where did you say you were from again? Oh, Baltimore, I've never been. And do you have any other children? No, I said, just Andre. She patted my hand. She said, well, it must be nice to finally have a daughter. And she got up and walked away. I sat there alone with my untouched champagne and I watched my son dance with his new wife. And I thought about Robert. And I thought, baby, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know how to be her mother now. I didn't know then that I was right to worry. I only knew that something had shifted. Something small. Something quiet. Something I couldn't yet name. But I felt it. The way you feel a draft in a house before you find the open window. I want to tell you about some things before we go any further. Some small things that won't seem important yet. But trust me, keep them in your mind. They're going to matter later. The first thing is the fig tree in my backyard. Robert planted it in 1998. It's taller than the fence now. Every August it drops fruit like it's trying to feed the whole neighborhood. I used to make preserves and send them to Andre. I haven't sent any in 3 years. The second thing is the porch swing. Robert built it with his own hands the summer before he got sick. Oak wood, sanded smooth, hung with chains from the beam above my front porch. He used to sit in it every Sunday morning with his coffee in the Baltimore sun. After he died, I sat in it alone every Sunday for 15 years. I still do. It's where I do my thinking. The third thing is a song. A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. Robert used to play it in the car on the way to drop Andre at school. He'd sing along, off-key, and Andre would laugh from the back seat and cover his ears. I haven't been able to listen to that song since the funeral. I can't. It lives in a locked room inside me, and I have not been able to open the door. The fourth thing is a recipe. My mother's sweet potato pie. 3 generations of women in my family have made this pie. My grandmother taught my mother taught me, and I was supposed to teach my son's wife. I make it every Thanksgiving. Every single Thanksgiving since I was 20 years old. The fifth thing is the scent of shea butter. I've rubbed it on my hands every night before bed for 35 years. It's a habit from my nursing days, when the hospital soap would crack my skin so badly my knuckles would bleed. Now it's just what my hands smell like. Robert used to say he could find me in the dark by the smell of my hands. Remember those 5 things: the fig tree, the porch swing, the song, the pie, the shea butter. Hold on to them for me, because in the story I'm about to tell you, every one of them is going to come back. And when they do, they're going to feel different. They're going to feel like me. I want to tell you something before I go on. The hardest part about what happened to me is not what they did. The hardest part is that there was no single thing, no one big moment I could point to and say, there, that's when my son stopped seeing me. It would have been easier if there had been. If he had slammed a door. If she had called me a name. If someone had done something so clear and so ugly that I could have walked out of that house with my head high and my dignity intact and told the story to my friends at Bethel AME, and they would have shaken their heads and said, Claudia, baby, you did the right thing. But that isn't how it happened. It happened in 1,000 small ways over 6 years, each one so small that to name it out loud would have made me sound ridiculous. Each one so small that if I had brought it up, Andre could have said, Mom, you're overreacting. And he would have been right, technically, about that one thing. but 1,000 small cuts will kill you just the same as one big one. And by the time I realized I was bleeding, I had been bleeding for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to be whole. Let me show you what I mean. Thanksgiving 2019. 5 months after the wedding, Andre flew me up to Boston. First class, which he insisted on. I was proud of him for being able to do that. I packed my carry-on with a cooler bag, and inside the cooler bag was my mother's sweet potato pie. I had made it the night before, in my kitchen in Baltimore, using the same tin pie plate my mother had used, using the same recipe written in her handwriting on a recipe card so old it was soft as cloth. When I arrived at Andre and Brittany's condo in Back Bay, Brittany hugged me at the door. She said, "Claudia, you didn't have to bring anything. I ordered an artisan pumpkin tart from this incredible bakery in Cambridge." I said, "Oh, honey, it's no trouble. This is tradition. I've been making this pie since before Andre was born." She took the pie from me with both hands, the way you take something fragile. She said, "That is so sweet. I'll put it right here on the counter." She put it on the counter, not in the refrigerator. On the counter, next to a stack of mail and a bowl of keys. I noticed. I didn't say anything. The Thanksgiving dinner was catered. A private chef came to the condo and served us a 5-course meal on china that Eleanor Whitfield had given them as a wedding gift. There was turkey, of course, but also a rack of lamb and something called a chestnut puree and a salad with pomegranate seeds and goat cheese. My pie sat on the counter the whole meal. At dessert, the chef brought out the artisan pumpkin tart. Brittany's parents were there. Eleanor and Preston had flown up from Connecticut, and Eleanor made a little speech about how the tart was from a bakery that had been written up in Food and Wine. Everyone had a slice. Everyone said it was delicious. Nobody mentioned my pie. I could see it from where I was sitting, still on the counter, still in its foil. When everyone got up from the table, I said, "Andre, baby, would anyone like a slice of Nana's pie?" And Andre, my son, my boy, the child I carried for 41 weeks and nursed for 14 months, Andre said, "Mom, we'll have it tomorrow, okay? Everybody's pretty full." I said okay. I flew back to Baltimore the next day. 3 weeks later, Andre called me to thank me for coming. During the call, I asked him how they'd liked the pie. There was a pause, a small one, but I heard it. He said, "It was delicious, Mom. Brittany loved it." I didn't say anything. I just said I was glad. I knew, the way mothers know, that he was lying. I found out 6 months later when Brittany was visiting her mother in Connecticut, and Andre came to Baltimore alone for a weekend. He had too much bourbon at dinner on Saturday night. I asked him again, casually, how the pie had gone over that Thanksgiving. He looked at me with a face I had never seen on him before. A guilty face. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Brittany threw it away the next morning. She said it didn't fit with the meal. That was the first cut. I told him it was fine. I told him I understood. I hugged him when he left for the airport. And then I sat on my porch swing for 3 hours and did not cry. I just sat. And I thought to myself, that boy knew. He watched her throw away his mother's pie, and he didn't say a word. But I forgave him. That's what mothers do. We forgive. God help us. We forgive. 2020, the pandemic. I called every Sunday. Andre always answered. But Brittany was never on screen, even though I could hear her in the background, moving around the apartment. She would say, "Hi, Claudia," from the other room, the way you greet a delivery person. One Sunday in July, Andre accidentally left the phone on the coffee table after putting me on speaker. He walked into the kitchen. I heard Brittany say, "Babe, you have to wrap this up. We have the call with my parents at 6. He said, I know. Give me 10 minutes. She said, "You give her 10 minutes every Sunday. Can't you just do every other week?" I held my breath. I waited for him to defend me. He said, "It's easier to just do it." Easier to just do it. Like I was a chore. Like calling his mama was on the same list as taking out the trash. I hung up before he came back to the phone. I told him later that the Wi-Fi had cut out. 2022, my 60th birthday. I had turned 60 on October 14th, 2022. 60 years old. A milestone. The kind of birthday a woman's people are supposed to gather for. I didn't tell Andre I wanted a party. I didn't tell him I wanted him to come home. I thought, the way foolish mothers think, that he would just know. He didn't. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up, made coffee, and checked my phone. No missed call, no text. I told myself he was busy. He was on West Coast time that week for work. He'd remember. At 3 in the afternoon, I got an email from Amazon, a $100 gift card. The message read, "Happy birthday, Mom. Treat yourself. Love, Andre and Brittany." That was it. I sat at my kitchen table and I stared at that email for a long time. A $100 Amazon gift card for my 60th birthday from my only son, who I had raised alone after his father died, who I had worked night shifts for 20 years to send to MIT, who had, in the year 2022, earned over $300,000 at his tech company. I knew because he had mentioned it offhandedly at Christmas. $100. I did not cry. Not then. My best friend, Dolores Jefferson, who has lived next door to me since 1991 and who lost her own husband 2 years after I lost Robert, came over that evening with a homemade lemon pound cake and 2 candles she'd dug out of her kitchen drawer. She sang happy birthday to me in the kitchen, off-key, the way Robert used to sing. And when she blew out the candles with me, she took my hand across the table and said, "Claudia, honey, I don't know what's going on with that boy of yours, but I want you to know. Some of us still see you." I went to bed early that night. I cried in the bathroom with the water running so Dolores wouldn't hear me through the wall. I was 60 years old. My only son had sent me a $100 gift card, and I was grieving my husband all over again because Robert would never have let this happen. Robert would have flown home for my birthday from the moon if he had to, but Robert was dead. And Andre was his mother's son, but he was also now his wife's husband, and those 2 things were not the same thing anymore. 2023, the pregnancy. I found out Brittany was pregnant from Instagram, not from Andre, not from a phone call, from a photograph posted by Eleanor Whitfield on her Instagram account, which I had started following after the wedding because it was the only way I ever got to see my son. The photograph was of a baby shower, a beautiful baby shower held 3 weeks earlier at a country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. There was a cake the size of a coffee table. There were balloons in pink and gold. There were 30 women, all of them white, all of them in pastel dresses, all of them laughing around Brittany, who sat at the center of a throne-like chair with her hands on her belly. The caption read, "Celebrating our baby girl with the women who matter most." The women who matter most. I sat in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and I read those words 4 times. Then I called Andre. He answered on the second ring. He sounded tired. He said, "Hey, Mom, what's up?" I said, "Andre, baby, are you going to be a father?" There was a long silence. He said, "Mom, I am so sorry. We were going to tell you this weekend, I promise." I said, "Why wasn't I invited to the baby shower?" He said, "It was just Brittany's side. Her mom wanted it small. It was really more for her friends from college and law school. You wouldn't have known anyone." I said, "Andre, I'm your mother. I am this baby's grandmother. I am the only living grandmother this child is going to have besides Eleanor. And you didn't tell me your wife was pregnant." He said, "Mom, don't make this a thing." That's what he said. Don't make this a thing. As if my being hurt was the problem. Not what they had done, but my reaction to it. I told him I had to go. I hung up, and I sat at the table, and I looked at the fig tree through the back window, and I thought about Robert. I thought about what Robert would have done. Robert would have gotten on a plane that same night. Robert would have put his fist down on that kitchen table and said, "Son, you will not disrespect your mother in this house." But Robert was gone, and I was alone. And my son was a man I did not recognize anymore. 2024, the birth of Imani. My granddaughter was born on April 3rd, 2024. Andre called me from the hospital at 6:47 in the morning. He was crying. For a moment it was the old Andre, the boy I had raised. He said, "Mom, she's here. She's so beautiful. She has your eyes." I cried too. Of course I cried. I said, "I'm coming, right now. I'll be on the next train." I took the Amtrak from Baltimore Penn Station at 9:15 that morning, 8 hours to Boston, changing in New York. I didn't even pack a bag. I just grabbed my purse and my coat and a small photograph of Robert that I kept in my wallet, because I wanted to show my granddaughter her grandfather's face. I arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital at 5:45 in the evening. I went to the maternity floor. I told the nurse at the desk I was there to see my granddaughter, Claudia Hayes. She smiled at me. She said, "Oh, how wonderful. Let me check the visitor list." She typed. She frowned. She typed again. She said, I'm so sorry, ma'am. You're not on the list. The parents have restricted visitors to immediate family only. I said, I am immediate family. I'm the grandmother. She said, I understand, but the mother has to approve you. Let me call into the room. I sat in that waiting room for 4 hours. 4 hours, on a plastic chair, in my traveling clothes, with a photograph of my dead husband in my wallet. At 9:47 p.m., Andre came out to the waiting room. He looked exhausted and embarrassed. He said, Mom, I'm so sorry. Brittany is overwhelmed. Her mom is in there, and she's only letting in one visitor at a time besides family. And I stood up. I said, Andre, I am family. He said, I know, Mom, I know. Come on. He took me back. Brittany was in the bed holding the baby. Eleanor was in the chair beside her. Eleanor looked up when I walked in and gave me a smile that barely moved her face. Brittany said, Oh, Claudia, you came all this way. I'm so sorry. I'm just really tired. She did not offer me the baby. I stood there for a full minute before Andre finally said, Britt, let Mom hold her. Brittany hesitated. Then she handed me my granddaughter. Imani was so small. She had a full head of dark curly hair. She opened her eyes once, and I did see, Robert's eyes, Robert's exact eyes, looking up at me from a face that had not existed 12 hours ago. I held her for 7 minutes. I know because Brittany said, Okay, I think she needs to eat, and I looked at the clock on the wall when I handed her back. 7 minutes, after 8 hours on a train. I went back to the hotel Andre had booked for me. I sat on the edge of the bed in my coat, and I did not move for a long time. I kept thinking about the way Brittany's hands had twitched when I had taken the baby, the way Eleanor had watched me the whole time, like I might steal something. I took the Amtrak home the next morning. I had spent 24 hours traveling to hold my granddaughter for 7 minutes. And on the train home, somewhere in Delaware, with the sun coming through the window and the fields rolling by, I finally understood something. They didn't see me as Imani's grandmother. They saw me as a guest. It was Christmas Day. Andre had flown me up to Boston for 3 days. It was the first time I had seen Imani since the hospital. She was 20 months old now, walking, talking a little, calling me Gamma in a voice that sounded like little bells. I was in the guest bedroom, folding the clothes I had unpacked. The door was open a crack. Andre's home office was directly across the hall, and his door was also open. I heard him on the phone. He was pacing. I heard Brittany's voice on speaker. Brittany said, How long is she staying this time? Andre said, 3 days. She leaves Saturday. Brittany said, Okay, just please manage her, okay? My mom is coming on Sunday, and I don't want any overlap. I can't do both of them in the same week. Andre said, Don't worry. I'll handle my mother. She won't be a problem. I'll handle my mother. She won't be a problem. I stood in the guest bedroom of my son's home with a folded sweater in my hands, and I felt something inside me go very still, very quiet. It wasn't anger. I had been angry before. This wasn't that. It was the sound of a door closing, a door I hadn't known was open, inside my own heart. I finished folding the sweater. I put it in the dresser. I went downstairs and I played with my granddaughter for the rest of the afternoon. I read her Goodnight Moon 3 times. I let her put her tiny, sticky hands in my hair. I memorized her face. I flew home on Saturday, as planned. I did not mention the phone call to Andre. What was there to say? March 2025. The email. It was a Tuesday morning, the first week of March. I was at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee when my laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line read, Nanny arrangements for Imani. Important. Please read carefully. The sender was Brittany Whitfield Hayes, not Andre. Brittany. I opened it. The email was 4 paragraphs long. It was written in the clean, professional prose of a corporate lawyer. It was addressed to me as Claudia, not Mom, not Claudia dear, not Mrs. Hayes, just Claudia. Paragraph 1 explained that Andre and Brittany had been reflecting on family dynamics and had consulted with Imani's pediatrician and a family therapist about what was best for Imani's development. Paragraph 2 explained that, given the complex dynamics of our extended family, they had decided to streamline Imani's exposure to grandparents in order to maintain consistency of caregiving. Paragraph 3, the one I read 4 times, stated that going forward, I would be welcome to visit Imani during pre-scheduled visits, maximum twice per year, with at least 60 days advance notice, and for a duration not to exceed 3 days per visit. Paragraph 4 closed with, Andre has reviewed this plan and agrees this is best for everyone. We know you'll understand. Please confirm receipt. Brittany, Andre has reviewed this plan and agrees. We know you'll understand. I read that email 4 times. I did not cry. I did not call my son. I closed the laptop. I stood up from the table. I poured the rest of my coffee into the sink. I walked through my living room, past the photographs on the wall, past the porcelain angels Robert had bought me, past the doilies my mother had made. I opened the front door. I walked out onto the porch. I sat down on the porch swing Robert had built with his hands 20 years ago. It was the first day of March. The air was cold, but the sun was out. Across the street, Mrs. Williams was sweeping her front steps. She waved at me. I waved back. I sat there for a long time, and I started talking, out loud, to myself, because there was no one else left to talk to. I spent 34 years teaching him to be a good man, and somewhere along the way, I forgot to teach him to be a good son. Or maybe I did teach him. Maybe I taught him perfectly, and he chose not to listen. Either way, that is on me. I raised the man who is breaking my heart. I rocked the swing slowly with my foot. I kept thinking, if I just loved them harder, if I just showed up one more time, if I just made one more pie, sent one more jar of preserves, rode one more 8-hour train, they would see me, they would remember, they would come back to me. But they saw me. That's the part I couldn't face until today. They saw me clearly, and they decided I wasn't worth the trouble. The worst part isn't that my son doesn't love me. I believe he does, in whatever shape love has become for him in that marriage. The worst part is that I have been performing gratitude for crumbs, and calling it family. I have been so afraid of losing him that I forgot I was already losing myself. I stopped rocking. I put both feet flat on the porch. I thought about Robert. I thought about what he would say to me if he were sitting next to me right now. And I knew clear as water what he would say. He would say, Claudia Marie Hayes, stand up. I stood up. I went back inside. I walked to the old stereo in the living room, the one Robert had set up in 1997 and never upgraded. I had not touched it in years. The speakers still worked. I knelt down in front of the cabinet and I flipped through the records until I found it. Sam Cooke. Ain't That Good News? I pulled it out. My hands were shaking. I hadn't played this record since Robert's funeral. I put it on the turntable. I set the needle on track 2. A Change Is Gonna Come. The first notes filled my living room. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the room, with my back against the couch, and I listened to that song all the way through. For the first time in 17 years, I did not cry. When the song ended and the needle lifted, I sat in the silence for a long time. And then I said, out loud, to the empty room and to Robert and to God and to myself, I'm done. I did not mean I was done with my son. I did not mean I was done with my granddaughter. I meant, I am done begging to be loved. I went back to the kitchen. I did not open the laptop. I did not reply to Brittany's email. I did not call Andre. I picked up the phone and I called Patricia Green, my old colleague from Johns Hopkins, who 2 years ago had asked me to come teach nursing students at the community college, and who I had turned down because I wanted to be available for Andre in case he ever needed me. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring. I said, Patricia, it's Claudia. If that teaching position is still open, I'd like to take it. She said, Claudia Hayes, honey, it has been open waiting for you for 2 years. When can you start? I said, Monday. I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at the fig tree. It was going to bloom soon. I want to tell you what nobody tells you about the moment you stop begging. They tell you it's going to feel like freedom, like a door swinging open, like you walk out into the sunshine and breathe deep and your whole life begins again. That is not how it happened for me. For me, it felt like grief. A different kind of grief than when Robert died. That was the grief of losing someone who had loved me. This was the grief of losing someone who had stopped. For the first 2 weeks after I sent Patricia that phone call, I moved through my house like a woman recovering from surgery. I slept. I ate toast. I watered the fig tree. I did not reply to Brittany's email. I did not call my son. I did not cry. Dolores came over one afternoon with a pot of greens and sat with me at the kitchen table. She didn't ask what had happened. She had been my friend for 34 years. She could read my face like scripture. She said, "Claudia, you're quieter than I've ever heard you." I said, "Dolores, I think I'm waking up." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was dry and warm, and I could feel her wedding ring on her finger, the one she still wore even though Harold had been gone for 12 years. She said, "Baby, it's about time." April, the first month. I started teaching on a Monday morning in April. The Community College of Baltimore County. Nursing 201, Clinical Fundamentals. 22 students, most of them young women. A handful of older women going back to school after raising kids or losing husbands or getting tired of working at Walmart. The first day I walked into that classroom, I almost turned around and went home. I was 62 years old. I had not been in a classroom since 1984, and I was wearing a blazer I had bought the weekend before at Macy's because I didn't own anything that felt like a teacher. I stood at the front of the room and I looked at those 22 faces, and I thought, "Claudia, you have cared for over 10,000 patients in your life. You have held the hand of more dying people than you can count. You have nothing to prove to anyone in this room." I opened my mouth. I said, "My name is Claudia Hayes. I worked the overnight shift at Johns Hopkins for 23 years. I'm going to teach you how to be the kind of nurse that patients remember. Let's begin." By the third week, I knew every student's name. By the fifth week, a young woman named Tanisha Brown stayed after class to ask me if I would be her mentor. She had 2 little kids at home. Her mother had died the year before. She said, "Mrs. Hayes, I don't have anyone in my life who's done what you've done. I just need somebody to tell me I can." I told her she could. She hugged me at the front of that empty classroom, and I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in a long time. I felt useful, not as a function, not as a service, as a person. A woman with something to give that someone actually wanted to receive. May, the fig tree. In the second week of May, I went out to the backyard with my pruning shears and I pruned the fig tree for the first time in 3 years. Robert used to do it every spring. I had watched him do it 100 times. After he died, I kept it up for a few years and then I stopped. I had been sending the preserves to Boston, and when that stopped mattering, the tree stopped mattering too. I cut back the dead branches. I cleared the weeds at the base. I dug compost into the soil. When I was done, my knees hurt and my back hurt and my hands were filthy, and I sat down on the grass and I looked up at that tree and I said, "Robert, I'm sorry." I let her go for a while. I let a lot of things go. The wind moved through the leaves. I don't believe in ghosts the way some people do, but I believe that the people we love leave something behind in the places where they loved us. And I believe that afternoon, sitting in the dirt underneath the tree my husband planted when our son was 7 years old, I felt him with me. I said, "I'm going to make preserves this year, baby. For me. Just for me. And for Dolores. And for anybody who wants some." The wind moved again. I took it as a yes. June. The phone call from Andre. It had been 93 days since Brittany's email when my son called me for the first time. I was sitting at the kitchen table grading papers. The phone rang. I looked at the screen. It said Andre. I took a breath. I answered. He said, "Mom?" I said, "Hi, Andre." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Mom, Brittany and I were just... We noticed you never responded to the email about the visitation schedule. We just want to make sure you received it, and..." I stopped him, gently. I said, "Andre." He said, "Yeah?" I said, "I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. There is nothing on this earth that will change that. Do you understand me?" He said, "Yeah, Mom, I love you too." I said, "But I'm not available for this conversation." There was silence on the line. I said, "I am not available to discuss a schedule that a woman I am not related to created for me to see my own grandchild. I am not available to negotiate terms for the privilege of being your mother. When you want to call me, not to manage me, not to deliver instructions from your wife, but to actually call your mother and talk to her, the way a son talks to his mother, I will answer the phone. Until then, baby, I've got to go." He said, "Mom, wait." I said, "I love you, Andre." I hung up. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. I put the phone on the table and I stood up and I walked in a circle around the kitchen 3 times. And then I sat down and I finished grading the papers. He did not call back that week. He did not call back that month. July, Charleston. Dolores and I had been planning a trip to Charleston, South Carolina for 15 years. We used to talk about it on her back porch in the summers. We'll go when the kids are grown. We'll go when we retire. We'll go when things settle down. Every year there had been a reason to put it off. For her, it was her hip. For me, it was Andre. Always something with Andre. Some visit he was planning. Some time he might need me. I called Dolores in the second week of June. I said, Dolores, we're going to Charleston. She said, when? I said, July. Last week, Tuesday to Saturday. She said, Claudia Hayes, are you serious? I said, book the flight, woman. I'm driving to your house right now to plan the trip. We went on July 22nd. 5 days. A little hotel on Meeting Street with a courtyard and a fountain. We ate shrimp and grits for breakfast. We took a carriage tour. We walked through the old slave market and stood in silence. We went to the Gullah Geechee Heritage Center on Johns Island. On Thursday morning, we visited a small church called First African Baptist, out near the water. Dolores wanted to see it because her great-grandmother had been baptized there in 1903. We went to the Wednesday night prayer service. It was small, maybe 15 people, mostly older women in hats. After the service, a woman came up to me. She was tiny. She looked 90 but was probably 78. She wore a straw hat with a yellow flower pinned to the side and a cream-colored cardigan even though it was 90 degrees outside. Her name was Miss Ruth Singleton. She took both of my hands in hers. She looked up into my face, and she said, Baby, you have the face of a woman who's been holding her breath for 40 years. I didn't say anything. She said, You can breathe now, sugar. You can breathe. And for the first time in 4 months, for the first time I realized, in maybe 15 years, I started to cry. Not a few polite tears. A full, open, shoulder-shaking cry. Right there in the fellowship hall of a little Baptist church on an island off the coast of South Carolina, in the arms of a woman I had known for 6 minutes. Miss Ruth held me. She didn't say anything else. She just held me. And rocked a little, like she had done this before, like she had held a lot of women who had been holding their breath for 40 years. When I finally stopped, she pulled back and looked at my face and wiped my cheek with her thumb. She said, There she is. There's the girl that's been in there. Welcome back, baby. Dolores drove us back to the hotel. She didn't say a word the whole drive. When we got to the room, she sat down next to me on the bed and took my hand, and we sat there in the dark for a long time without speaking. August. Marjorie Thompson. Pastor Wendell Brooks had been asking me for 6 months to lead a Wednesday night grief group at Bethel AME for women who had lost their husbands. He had first asked me the summer before the email, and I had said no, I didn't feel ready. He had asked me again in April, and I had said no, I was busy teaching. In early August, he asked me a third time. We were standing in the vestibule after Sunday service. I said yes. The first Wednesday, 12 women came. They ranged in age from 51 to 83. Some of them had been widowed for 30 years, some of them for 6 months. One of them, a woman named Carmen Rivera, had lost her husband 3 weeks before, and she had come to the meeting straight from work with her name tag from the bank still clipped to her collar. I hadn't planned what to say. I had my Bible and a notebook and a thermos of coffee, and I sat down on a folding chair in the circle, and I looked at those 12 faces, and I did something I had not done in front of anyone except Dolores. I told them the whole story. The pie on the counter, the baby shower on Instagram, the 7 minutes with Imani, the overheard phone call, the email. I told them about the porch swing and A Change Is Gonna Come and Miss Ruth in Charleston. I told them I had been so busy being a mother that I had forgotten I was also a woman. When I was finished, nobody spoke for a long time, and then a woman sitting 3 seats to my left put her face in her hands and started to cry. Quietly. The way women cry when they have been crying alone for so long that it feels strange to do it in front of other people. Her name was Marjorie Thompson. She was 71 years old. She was black, like most of the women in the room, and she had widow's eyes, that look you only get from waking up alone for a very long time. She wiped her face with a tissue someone handed her. She looked at me. She said, Mrs. Hayes, I need to ask you something. I said, Yes, Marjorie? She said, Did you work at Johns Hopkins in 2003? I said, I did. I worked there until 2016. Her hands went up to her mouth. She said, You saved my baby. I didn't understand. She said, My daughter, Crystal. She was 22 years old. She came into the ER at Hopkins in April of 2003 with a fever of 105. She was in septic shock. They brought her up to the ICU, and you were the charge nurse that night. You sat with her for 11 hours. You didn't leave her bedside. You held her hand and told her her mama was coming. You told her to hold on. When I got there, she was stable. The doctor said it was because somebody had caught the signs 2 hours earlier than anybody else would have. That was you. I was staring at her. I said, Marjorie, how is Crystal? She started to cry again. She said, she's a pediatric nurse at Mercy. She has 3 kids. She named her oldest daughter Claudia. The room was silent. Marjorie got up from her chair. She walked across the circle. She sat down next to me. She put her arms around me and she held on. She said, Mrs. Hayes, you saved my baby, and now you came back to save me. I am 62 years old. I have been a nurse for 40 years. I have held the hands of more dying people than I can remember the names of. And in that moment, sitting in a folding chair in the fellowship hall at Bethel AME in West Baltimore, with a stranger holding me and crying into my shoulder, I understood something I had never quite understood before. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my only son to see me that I had forgotten how many people already had. My value was not sitting in a condo in Back Bay, being measured in twice-yearly visits. My value was scattered across this city, in lives I had saved, in hands I had held, in mothers whose babies had come home because I had been working the night shift. I had been rich my whole life. I had just been looking in the wrong direction. October, the knock on the door. It was a Tuesday morning in October. Cold, the first real cold snap of the fall. I was in the kitchen. I was making myself a proper breakfast. Eggs and grits and a slice of toast, the way I used to make for Robert on his days off. I had the radio on. Marvin Gaye was playing. I was humming. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and went to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was Andre. He was alone. He was holding something in his hands. I opened the door. He stood on my porch in a coat that was too thin for the weather. He had not shaved in several days. There was gray in his beard that had not been there the last time I saw him. He looked thinner. He looked older. He looked tired in the way that men look tired when their lives are falling apart and they are pretending they are fine. He held up what he was carrying. It was a pie, homemade, in a tin pie plate, covered in foil. He said, Mom, I made this. I tried to follow the recipe you sent me back in 2020, the sweet potato one, Nana's. I said, I never sent you that recipe, Andre. I offered to. You said no. He said, I found the email. I had saved it, but I never opened the attachment. I opened it last week. I've been practicing. I looked at the pie. I looked at my son. I said, Does Brittany know you're here? He shook his head. He said, Mom, can I come in? I don't want anything. I'm not here to manage anything. I'm not here to fix a schedule. I just wanted to sit with my mother, if you'll let me. I stood in my doorway for a long time, and this is the moment. This is the moment the whole story has been walking toward. The old Claudia, the Claudia from a year ago, the Claudia from 5 years ago, would have pulled him inside, would have hugged him and cried and told him it was all okay, would have heated up the pie and sat with him and forgiven him before he even had to ask. I looked at my son. I really looked at him, and I said, Andre, you can come in. He started to smile. Relief. The relief of a man who thought he might have been turned away. I held up my hand. I said, but we're not going back to what we were. I want you to understand that. The woman who spent the last 6 years begging for your time, bringing you pies, riding trains for 8 hours to hold a baby for 7 minutes. She is gone. She doesn't live here anymore. I'm someone else now. If you want to come in, you're going to meet me for the first time. Not as the mother who will do anything for you. As a woman, with my own life, with my own students, with my own garden, with my own friends who have known me for 40 years. You don't get to come back to who I used to be, because she doesn't exist anymore. But if you want to meet who I am, I'll put some coffee on, and we can sit down. But you come in on my terms now, Andre. Not Brittany's, not yours. Mine. Do you understand me? He was standing very still on the porch. The cold wind was blowing through his thin coat. His eyes were wet. He said, Yes, Mom, I understand. I stepped aside. He walked in, inside. He set the pie on the counter. I heated up coffee in the pot Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary. Andre looked around the kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time. He said, "Mom, the house looks different." I said, "I painted the kitchen last month. Dolores helped me. It's called Morning Butter." He nodded. He said, "It looks nice?" We sat at the kitchen table, my son and I, with coffee between us, with a sweet potato pie he had made with his own hands on the counter. He did not try to explain Brittany. He did not try to defend the email. He did not apologize in a big sweeping way that would have let him off the hook. He said, "Mom, I don't know who I've been for the last few years." I said, "I know you don't, baby." He said, Things are not good with Brittany. I've been trying to hold it together. I didn't want to come here with bad news. I wanted to come here just to see you." I said, "You can tell me about Brittany if you want to, but not today. Today we're just sitting." We sat. We drank coffee. After a while I got up. I went to the stereo in the living room. I put the Sam Cooke record on. I came back to the kitchen. A Change Is Gonna Come started to play. Andre looked up. He said, "Mom, Dad used to play this in the car." I said, "I know, baby, I know he did." He started to cry. Not loud, just quiet tears. I reached across the table and I took my son's hand. I said, "Andre Malcolm Hayes, I am your mother. I will always be your mother. But I want you to know something." He looked at me. I said, "I came back to myself. I don't know the exact day it happened. Somewhere between the fig tree blooming this spring and you standing on my porch this morning, I came back." He nodded. He said, "I can see that, Mom." I said, "It took me a long time, and I'm not going to lose her again. Not for anybody. Not even for you. Do you understand?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." That was the first time my son had called me ma'am in 15 years. Outro. Andre stayed for 3 hours. He ate a slice of his own pie. It wasn't as good as mine. He knew it. He laughed about it. We cut him another slice. When he left, he hugged me at the door. A long hug. The kind of hug he used to give me when he was small and he'd had a bad dream. He said, "I'll call you Sunday, Mom. Not to manage anything. Just to call." I said, "I'll be here, baby. I'll answer." I closed the door. I went back out to this porch. I sat down on the swing Robert had built. I rocked slowly with my foot. The air smelled like fall and like the last of the figs on the tree out back. My hands smelled like shea butter. The song was still playing from the stereo inside. I did not know what was going to happen with Andre and Brittany. I did not know when I would see my granddaughter again. I did not know if the sweet potato pie and the hug and the yes ma'am were the beginning of something real or just a man in crisis who would disappear again when his crisis passed. I did not need to know, because for the first time in a long time, my life was not a waiting room for other people's choices. It was a home, my home, full of my own things, my own work, my own friends, my own purpose. Whatever Andre did next would happen in a life where I was no longer the one at the window, watching. I want to say one more thing to you before I go. If you are a woman watching this video, and I suspect most of you are, and you have been sitting in your kitchen with cold coffee in front of you, wondering where you went, wondering when exactly you became the help in your own family, I want you to know that you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. You have just been holding your breath for 40 years, and you are allowed to breathe now. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to put the pie down. You are allowed to not answer the email. You are allowed to teach a class and plant a garden and take the trip to Charleston you have been putting off for 15 years. You are allowed to come back to yourself. It is not too late, I promise you. I am 62 years old and I came back. You can too. I don't know when exactly I came back to myself. Somewhere between the fig tree blooming and the morning my son knocked on my door, I stopped waiting to be loved the way I wanted and started loving myself the way I deserved. One morning I woke up and the coffee tasted right again, and I knew I was home.